Welcome to the Property Hustler Show. Today we're going to be discussing the importance of having a great real estate lawyer on your team, the importance of certain clauses, some tips and tricks along the way to protect you on your real estate investing journey. My name is Andrew, and today Ping and I are joined by Hussein Kudrati, who is a real estate lawyer. He is a real estate investor for both here in Canada and the United States, and he is also a fishing addict. So if you ever want to connect with him about fishing, he's the guy to talk to. So Hussein, really great to have you on the show.
Thanks, guys. Looking forward to a great discussion.
Hussein, question for you. Where do you think the upcoming opportunities are?
Upcoming opportunities are in creativity. I think it's about not necessarily an asset class, or particularly because there's a number of people who have left jobs through COVID and recessions, and just honestly, the Gen Z generation is just burnt out and they want to be more entrepreneurial. Real estate is an awesome vehicle to be entrepreneurial, and I believe historically it's proven itself. Wealth creation almost invariably has an element of real estate attached to it. Mm-hmm. So when you're going through it and attaching wealth creation from that perspective, I think it's about opportunity found through who you partner with, your due diligence, what makes you separate. For me, I feel real estate in 2023 and 2024, the dividing factor will not be on someone finding a unique asset class or, identify an opportunity. It's about picking multiple, or sometimes having a niche in one, but actually knowing how to identify where the value proposition is. It's about taking a building and seeing what can I do with it? Where can I repurpose it? Taking a residential, could I do a residential commercial? Taking a commercial and saying, could I make it mixed use? How do I maximize the use of the opportunity? That's where it comes to. And also, how are you funding your deals? How are you creating and structuring it to make sure that you're optimizing yourself for success? Because I see a lot of investors, they talk about cash flow as being the most important thing. Cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. To me, if you could earn, say, $1,000 a month as cash flow, which are only going to keep you for 2 years and only make $20K on it in equity appreciation, or you make zero cash flow, maybe you have to put in $25K and you sell it for $150K more, which is a better proposition?
The second one, for sure.
People don't have the patience. People don't have that temperament to doing it, right? Saying, how do I actually get to the position where I can actually get the ultimate return to generate wealth? Because that's what anyone who's investing in it, that's what the ultimate goal should be. If it's not wealth creation, then you're playing it wrong. And that's when people say the ultimate goal is cash flow. I always tell them that your mindset needs to be a little adjusted to focus on wealth generation.
By the way, I really like what you just said, because cash flow has been overly emphasized, in my opinion, right? People are talking about squeezing that $200, $300 per month from your rental properties. But then when there's a roof leak, furnace shutdown, that it wipes out your entire year of profit. And if that's something that you're banking on, then I think it's a little risky. And also, the landlord-tenant board is just not in landlord's favor, right? It's very tenant-friendly. So if anything happens, I'd be crying. I'd be crying about my investment. So with our current approach is that we don't want to overemphasize the cash flow too much, right? Right now is the time where you want to have a high cash reserve with the right opportunity, because the market did come down 20, 30%. In some area, it could be even 40%. This is the opportunity that everybody was asking for in the past 2, 3, 4 years. Why not try to play the equity game a little bit better?
Exactly. And people live in this fear of, now it's high interest rates. And honestly, for me, it's, first you complain about the high prices. Now you complain about the high interest rates. I'm like, essentially, you're just complaining to find a reason not to take action, to not actually go out and seize opportunity. And also seek mentors. That's the other part, right? A lot of people just let fear drive it. And, they see the news about interest rates, or see the news about housing prices, but actually analyze it, actually think, what does this actually mean? In isolation, a number doesn't mean anything. And if you don't have the right people telling you how to look through the numbers, and not just telling you, but teaching you, how do I evaluate this to make myself work in a way that makes sense for me? And also, what can I afford? Most people, when you have a conversation with them, saying, what can I afford to buy, especially talking about investment properties, they don't know what they can afford. Educate yourself in what you can actually afford. It's so important.
I really like what you're saying in that the creative part, really, actually, you're kind of telling people you need to be able to think a little bit. You need to be able to look at something, assess it, and make a critical judgment there, right, onto what it is that you can do. But there's a fundamental flaw, I think, with the way real estate education is delivered. It's almost like the original real estate investors who were making it big, we all were able to, or real estate investors would all think creatively, think openly, and look at product and say, what can I do with this? How can I maximize this? How will this carry me to my objectives? Whatever that might have been. And at the time, it was cash flow. But everybody took this as a roadmap, and then now they have linear thinking. They just think this is the way to go. and not thinking about how do I adapt and pivot along the way with the product that I have, or do I pivot into different product? Because what was working before isn't necessarily working now. So what is going to work now really needs some innovation.
Absolutely. And part of it is a strategy, right? I like to tell clients that you should have the 1 year, the 3 year, the 5 year, and the 10-year strategy when you're going into real estate. And once you have know what your goals are, then you adjust and you develop through that. Because once you know what your ultimate goal, some people might say, I want to have a 2-year strategy because I need to pay for something. I want to move out of the country. I want to go back home, whatever it might be that your strategy is. So once you know your strategy, then you build out your structures. Because a lot of people, they just end up buying properties without thinking about structure, but they don't think about, well, this is actually a long-term asset. I want to pass it down to my next generation. They're so focused on just getting the deal done and focusing on, because for example, people will negotiate a mortgage rate, people will negotiate insurance, and they'll negotiate all these things, but they don't negotiate what's the structure and how much is this going to cost me down the line versus what I'm going to pay up front. And it seems like it's self-serving as a lawyer to say, oh, well, structure, because obviously, yes, I'm not going to lie. I make money when I help you structure, but I'm also making you money. It's a mutually beneficial relationship because I'm only going to make money if I'm actually creating a structure that makes sense to you, and I'm going to present it to you why it makes sense for you and why it makes sense for your goal. I'll take the time to understand. Do you have children? What's your family situation? Because there's a estate planning element in real estate investing that people completely neglect often.
You have been practicing law for quite a while. You've obviously done tons of deals. And similarly to the way I sometimes view accountants and people who really get to see the nitty-gritty and often the dirty of what happens in real estate, I think it gives you such a unique perspective, what to do, what not to do, how you might get burned, how you might not get burned, and gives you unique insights. Do you feel that doing your own real estate investing, being a lawyer and facilitating deals, does this give you like a much deeper perspective into the realities of real estate investing?
Absolutely, simply by the perspective that I've seen what works and what doesn't work. And I learn because I see deals presented by all the big mortgage brokers, for example. I see deals written up by all the big realtors. So I see what's good, I see what's bad, and I see also how other lawyers do things. I know, for example, I had a private deal that comes to mind that I knew the lawyer on the other side. I knew exactly what the issues were going to be. And in the end, I helped my client secure the private deal because I knew what he needed to put in the offer to get that lawyer to say, take that offer. And actually was $50,000 lower than the competing offer. But I made sure the clauses would get that lawyer's approval. It's about the inside knowledge a little bit that can sometimes come in extremely handy. And that only comes by function of closing deals for clients.
Do you still trust people? Like, after seeing so many deals or partnerships fall apart.
I would never ever give I wouldn't give $1 in a real estate deal unless it was papered properly. Because to me, the value of paper is incredible in real estate deals. Because also people aren't familiar with the statute of frauds matters. Like things have to be papered even just to ensure your legal rights on there. And so like getting a proper JV agreement, getting, if you're lending, getting a mortgage registered and securitized with a loan agreement, a GSA, whatever might need to be supplemented with that, ask. And honestly, the question anyone who, when they want to get into real estate investing, especially if they're not buying the property directly themselves, they should be asking their lawyer, what do I not know? What am I not thinking about? And if you're not getting a laundry list response and with specifics, find a different person to advise you. And honestly, the same goes for your accountant. The same goes for your mortgage broker if you are buying. They should be telling you what you don't know, because if they don't say that, then you're going to be in trouble.
On the point of being structured, obviously because of your experiences, I think you would be considerably more structured. But in real estate investors, I feel like it's hard to sometimes call real estate investors professionals. Because they're often not professionals. It's just, somebody who's able to go out, buy a property, and sometimes people make deals. They literally do handshake deals, go out, make something work, and nothing is structured, nothing is said, nothing is organized. And oftentimes people see these things work out. And then when you tell these people that you need to start structuring, you need to start getting organized, you need to become a little methodical so that problems don't happen. Sometimes real estate investors will look at that and say, well, this seems like a lot of unnecessary work. It's expensive to structure, too many things that I have to figure out. And then it also brings to light all the things that can go wrong because contracts are a lot of contingencies. What if this? What if that? What if that? And it often dissuades people. So do you feel like there's a balance of trust and structuring that needs to go into these JVs that you see sometimes?
Absolutely. And again, are contracts perfect? Absolutely not. And litigation in itself is not a perfect science because two judges hearing the same facts often can come to differing conclusions, as could two investors analyzing a property, similar case pattern. So what I always say is, what matters to you? Like, what aspect of it matters to you? You're not going to get 100% of any transaction papered because Sometimes you also need to get the deal done. There's the practicality side of getting something done. But what matters, and for me, the number one thing that matters is what's my exit strategy? How am I going to get my money back? Because that's the main reason, is making money, or at least not losing money. That at a minimum should be structured. The contingency, everything else could be there. But how do you divorce yourself? Essentially, do you want to be stuck with someone who you don't want to be partners with no recourse? And that's where it can become very expensive. So you might say that, oh, well, it's a lot, it's dissuading and that. But what's the alternative if something doesn't work out? Because the truth is, I know many people, many people who have been very successful, have, dozens of properties literally, and do handshake deals. They go without a realtor, go to the neighbor, write up an offer on with their literally with a pencil sometimes, and then come and say, we want to close this deal. And I'm just like, I can't even make sense of the number. I don't know how much you're buying it for. I don't even know which property. None of this is done right. But they've made millions, and they don't want to hear. They're like, listen, your job is to close a deal, and then you sign the appropriate disclaimers, you get it done. But I've seen people get really badly hurt. We've seen, some big investors recently, without naming names, that have gone bankrupt. People have lost money or still waiting to get money back from those kinds of transactions. If something's good, you don't need it written. It's like a marriage. When your marriage is good, you don't need a marriage agreement. But when things get bad, you sure as hell will hope that you had it. So it's all about your risk tolerance. If you feel you can risk a capital you're putting into real estate, by all means, go ahead, right? Don't save yourself a few bucks. But be sure that if something goes wrong, you've limited your opportunities, and the cost to fix it will be much, much higher.
So let's get into a little bit technical here. So obviously there's so many different terms that the lawyers going to be using to make sure that it is worded properly. Can we talk about a few categories that you will always look at when you're reviewing a JV agreement?
So the first is, when is distributions going to be made? I want to know the timelines. If there's going to be cash distributions throughout, or is it going to be at the end? What does that look like, and where is that being funded from? I also want to know who else is involved in the JV. Is the person bringing me the deal putting their own money in? How many partners are they bringing in? Because the more partners there is sometimes, and if they all have a decision say, then it can become more problematic. Then I look at exit strategies. I look at exit in the event of death or disability. If there's an active partner, disability matters. But death, do I want to be stuck with, my investor's parent, wife, child, husband, whatever it is? Do I want to be involved with that? I don't know. Then I look at a right of first refusal, because I know that if you bring a court application through the Partitions Act to actually force a sale of a property, it's not easy. A lot of yelling at by the judge saying, why did you not get your agreements done in place? So one Partition Act application that I did, the legal fees came to about $50,000 for just one party. So it's not a cheap process to go through, right? To actually deal with. And you can say, yeah, well, it can be done cheaper, but do you really want to, when you want to exit, are you really going to be looking for the cheapest lawyer, or the lawyer who's going to get it done right? There's a cost to staying in a relationship that you want out of. Who's responsible? Who is making decisions? Who's accountable? And personally, if it's a smaller JV, with bigger JVs, it's not as easy. For bigger ones, I like a budget to be presented. There should be an initial pro forma budget, and then an updated one showing where are we at, either quarterly, biannually, or annually, depending on the length of the joint venture. The other part of it is that you look at it from the perspective that if it's not going to be a budget, then I actually need to know one bank account, ideally, that I know that this bank account is dedicated, so that for me, if I was coming in, I would know that if I want to see a clear trail of expenses, everything should be from this bank account. And the agreement should say all expenses, all receipts, all income, everything's going through this bank account, because then it's pure. There's no issues. It gives me confidence to invest. And as investors, if you want to raise capital, just think about it. If you can offer that as a assurance, saying that whenever you want, I'll send you monthly bank statements so you can see ins and outs of what's going on. I make the decisions, but you can see the transparency. It allows you to have actually more decision control while giving the illusion of sharing. Because, unless you're going in without intending to be transparent, which is a whole different conversation, it doesn't hurt, and it allows you so much more control of your people are more willing to give up control. Then they're not going to ask for a directorship in a corp and things like that. So those are the things I look at when you're actually structuring it, right? And having a right of first refusal clause. A shotgun clause where you just hate each other's guts and you just want out. It's easy. A shotgun clause, you make an offer, either you buy it at that price or you sell it to me at that price. We go our separate ways. But always know who you're arguing with. Sometimes if there's a richer party, you want to make sure you might have a lockup period where nothing can happen. So you're protecting yourself, except in the event of fraud, criminality, certain things where you do just want to get out if someone's committing those things. So that's important as well to consider.
Do you ever include a timeline for a joint venture agreement? For example, like after 3 years or 5 years, unless everybody agree to hold it, this property needs to go on MLS or needs to be sold.
Yes, we do that. And or alternatively, what we do put into the joint venture agreements is we say that this parties agree to renegotiate, and these terms will stay until it's renegotiated, and then have a dispute resolution clause saying that if it cannot be renegotiated within 3 months after the end of that date, we'll renegotiate. Because, so for example, sometimes one of the parties is the laborer, right? Whose contribution is X, right? But his contribution is done at that point. So it makes sense for up to a certain point. But if another party is still carrying financing and capital within the project, there's now an imbalance of power, and it could cause resentment and unhappiness, right? So that's why, and again, that's why it's important to know your clients and understand that. And why people say, oh, you just don't want to give a template because you want to keep earning fees. But I'm like, it matters who you're going into and what they're actually contributing. If you're going to tell me every deal is going to look exactly the same, which I'm skeptical because that's just not how it works. But that would be where I would be leaning to.
So if somebody was wanting to structure something for their relationship and their venture, would you recommend they go to someone like yourself first, or would you recommend they write it out, give it to you so you know what they're doing, and then you build on that?
100%. It would be significantly cheaper if you had a detailed list of exactly what you wanted your relationship to be. That's why I have checklists that if clients ask me, I send them a checklist like, these are the things you should be thinking about. Answer these questions, we review it, I help you think it through further if it's not clear, then we draft. Honestly, it will save you about half the cost of actually getting an agreement prepared, is actually knowing what you want in it.
Yeah, that would be good to do. Also, because I think a lot of people, they will write these one-pager JV agreements, right?
Which is terrible.
And yeah, a lot of people do it actually. And this is probably the most common way in partnerships that people do in real estate investing, right? When two people pair up, they might not know a hell of a lot. They don't know everything that can go wrong, so they don't even know what to write. So my question to you is there any kind of default rules that in the absence of something, the relationship falls to? For example, let's say that in the event of death, we didn't cover that in our contract. Is there a specific rule as to what happens in that? Or is there general things that people forget where it's like, okay, you didn't include it, so by default, we'd go to this?
Unfortunately, that's the problem. There isn't, because then you go into the realm of common law. So if you had civil law, it's a little bit easier where it's just statutorily prescribed that this happens and this happens. But like going back to my earlier point, you could have two decisions that are conflicting. Now you have to have a third judge decide which one does he like better. Those are not good odds. So honestly, here's the thing. If you can control your own destiny, why leave it in the hands of someone else?
Like that. Write it down. Write down your destiny.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sometimes real estate investors will be told, build out your power team, right? And who's your power team? Your realtor, your accountant, and especially make sure to get a good real estate lawyer. But a lot of the times people don't understand, what does a real estate lawyer do for me? You know, people watch movies, they'll sit there watching Suits and thinking that, okay, this lawyer is going to advocate for me, fight for me, do all these things for me, and oftentimes I think, you know, they don't understand what exactly it is that they're paying for. What do you think that they're actually paying you to do?
And that's a very good question, because so a lot of people say, well, I have a deal and close my deal. That's one part of real estate law. And if that's all you want, then that's fine. But if you're a real estate investor, to me, that's a mistake, because ultimately there are lots of great realtors out there. Having a lawyer look through an agreement, especially if it's a complex deal, there's a unique like VTBs and things like that. Those are clauses you should not be drafting yourself. There's nuance attached to them. There's implications attached to them. Go and get a good real estate lawyer, and you're going to use them to close a deal. 100% will look through the clause for you. Now, within reason, if it's like drafting the entire agreement, then that's going to be a different fee. But there's some real estate lawyers who will do that for you if you don't know how to do it, if you want to do a private deal. I've literally had clients call me on a Sunday afternoon saying, I need to put in an offer on this deal before the guy decides to go to get it listed. Can you help me put an offer together? That's part of the service we do. What is your real estate lawyer willing to do for you to help you get the deal done? The second part is also with reviewing like mortgage instructions and things like that, and understanding like, you know, which is the best term sheet. Like we just closed like a pretty big deal for a client out in Windsor, and we help them negotiate. We help them review the term sheet. We help them understand the implications. Because often, like we have another deal closing tomorrow, actually, where what's happened is that no one actually took the time to explain to our client when they signed the mortgage term sheet, the implications it made on their existing indebtedness. And if you've already got existing securities associated, especially if you signed a general security agreement, you've given it over not just your existing assets, but also some of your future assets. So when you're going to buy another deal, how does that impact? Because will the future lender be okay that the existing lender on your other properties have got some of the security? So it's understanding that and actually making sure that you're not setting yourself up for an extremely stressful closing because no one actually chose to look into what actual security has been taken by existing lenders in your situation.
Okay, I have a genuine question about what you just said, actually. I'm assuming the clause that you're talking about is when the lender will say that if, let's say, you're buying it in a corporation, that you, whoever is on the corporate title, is also responsible for the mortgage, and any of your assets may be responsible. You may be able to go after your personal assets if you default on this mortgage, let's say.
Mhm.
That's what you're talking about, right?
No, it's more than that. So, for example, when you go and get, especially commercial, or private lending,
Yeah.
what they'll say is when you first get, you will go and sign a mortgage. That'll be the first part. Then you'll sign an assignment of rents and leases for the rents, right?
Yeah.
Then the securitization of that is done through what is known as a general security agreement, which means that all the chattels, papers, records of that company you're offering up as security. One of the things in most GSAs is it applies to future. Anything else you buy in the future, any money you earn in the future is also securitized by the GSA.
Is that registered?
It's registered under the Personal Property Security Act, Ontario.
Okay.
So that's where the GSA is registered.
So future lenders will be able to find that.
We'll be able to see that PPSA registration and say, well, no, I don't want to be behind these people for this corporation. I want the GSA in first position.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like all future lenders are now in second position.
Not on the chart. On the actual real estate, no. But on the personal property, the securitization of it.
Yeah.
But they will not lend to you without getting that priority. So then you need to get a comfort letter from your first lender and work through it to make sure that either they'll ask for a discharge, and if they're nice and your lawyer's good at negotiating, they will accept a comfort letter. That comfort letter is not always easy. So then it becomes a timeliness issue of making sure, does your closing date allow to get that comfort letter? Because otherwise you have to now negotiate extensions. You have to now, you're at the whim of other people, and it goes back to controlling your own destiny. So if you know that, this is worst case is going to be required, you start the comfort letter. You call your contact at the existing institution, say, hey, I'm doing this financing. Can we do anything? Connect the lawyers, get the conversation started. So you're not doing it at the last minute. And that's the part that honestly makes my job often the hardest. And I mean, even sometimes when we've worked and talked about other deals and reviewed deals, we found that some of the biggest challenges when mortgage instructions come in at times that are, sometimes you just can't help it, right? Last minute deals happen and things like that. But when there's not been that due diligence, that then causes other issues down the line. It's about making sure that the lawyer is involved from the beginning, because ultimately it's your team. If you're hiring someone to close a deal for you, make sure that you're also retaining them to monitor the deal for you, to make sure that it's the right deal that you're actually getting. Like zoning is another common issue, right? Like I always see duplex or triplex. That doesn't even mean anything in the city of Hamilton. That term is not used anywhere. Like use the right terminology to give yourself, so that if someone has lied, if the vendor has misrepresented, you have appropriate recourse. Prepare recourse for yourself. That's important.
So the moment that there's a disagreement between obviously lawyers, seller, buyers, and all that stuff, the real estate lawyer is going to negotiate as best as they can.
Absolutely.
Right, to resolve the issue so that it doesn't get into litigation, which is probably the worst that it can happen to anybody, right? Anything litigation, it becomes costly.
Absolutely.
At what point would you say, okay, this is going to be out of my hand and we need to hire a litigation lawyer to handle that matter?
There's no one spot. It ultimately is depending on the outcome, right? And part of it is I talk to my clients and I say to them, like, this is your outcome. I have litigators I'll review the file with them. I'll say, what's the strength of the case? Because ultimately you don't want to negotiate and hurt yourself, right? So you get an opinion from them and you say, okay, well, this is the likelihood of my success. This is the strengths, this is the weaknesses. And then you make a decision. You have an honest conversation with them. And that's something that I'm not afraid to do. I'm willing to tell my clients that, you know what? Right now, you need to fold because you're just going to make the situation worse for yourself. You might bluff and be successful, but my job isn't to play poker with your money. My job is to give you an honest assessment and then let you make an informed decision. And so that's where it comes in. But more often than not, I'd say like 60, 70% of the time, even in very contentious deals where, there's a lot of yelling and everything going as happens from time to time, we work it out because ultimately the clients more often than not want to close a deal. The challenging ones is when one party is just really motivated not to. And that's sometimes happening nowadays. But even then, we figure out ways because people ultimately, money is a great motivator and people don't want to lose it.
There comes a point where you can play the people versus playing the game, which is maybe where your contracts are. Because when it comes to fighting, people understand how time costing and also financially costing the fighting can be. So yeah, you can definitely play the people instead of playing the game. But in terms of playing the game, based off of what you're telling me, it almost makes me think that realtors should definitely be working very closely with a lawyer, even on how they make their contracts. Because from the way you're describing it, it's almost as though a realtor can put you in a bind if they don't write their contracts properly. Because they're making the initial contract, they're making the offering, and your work is going to be dependent on what that contract says. So if they don't use the correct terminology, like you're saying, triplex doesn't mean anything. A lot of people believe that triplex is like a defining term, but you're saying it's not.
So you can go in and see the municipal bylaws, and you'll find that term is not mentioned anywhere. Realtors have go-to lawyers that they send tons of business to. The least the relationship should be is they should be able to pick up the phone. Like some clauses, if you're a seasoned realtor, you just know that this is a good clause. And OREA has like standard formats and all these things that are, some of which are good. Some of OREA clauses are awful. That's a whole other conversation. But it all comes down to a very simple point to me again, is that if you're the relationship and you can add value to your client by making sure that you're making things the best they possibly could be, if you're good at your job, you should be motivated to do the best you can for your client. It's as easy as that.
Would you recommend buyers or any buyers or investors to always go to a lawyer, confirm a few different clauses, and then bring that back to the realtor? Or just fully trust the realtor that they'll do their job and then trust that the realtor is going to reach out to their lawyer for advices?
Unless you're absolutely certain that this is a very simple, straightforward, easy deal, and you're seasoned and you've done this over and over and over again, what is the harm in getting your realtor saying, I'm not going to sign the offer, send it to my lawyer, or my lawyer gives me the go ahead, I'm going to do it? Like, which realtor who wants to earn a commission is going to say, oh, I take exception, you don't trust me? Because honestly, if your realtor has that much of an ego, I would almost question, like, should you be working with them? You're not trusting them. You're just having a second set of eyes. And when you're putting in sometimes the biggest investment of your life when putting into these offers, two sets of eyes a bad thing? I don't think so.
No, it's like having an extra insurance policy on this, really. And it's like a more, in my opinion, a more reliable one. If you are an investor with, let's say, a general gameplay that you always do, like you're somebody who buys and flips, I think those clauses that you're using and things you look out for will become a little repeated over time. So your contract, your offers will become more refined, especially if you probably work with the same lawyer to constantly refine that process to protect yourself.
Yeah, and it's simple. Like, a lot of people forget one very simple clause. Even if you think you're going to close the property, if you're an investor, always have an assignment clause. It's a get out of jail free card. Like, literally, I call it the Monopoly get out of the jail free card. If you don't have an assignment clause, you're just handicapping yourself. And honestly, if you're buying an obvious investment property, the seller objects, there's no reasonable reason to say that and say, listen. And the way to negotiate that, and again, this is where I took the value, is offer a bit of a higher deposit. Saying, for the assignment clause, we'll give you an extra $5,000 deposit. It's going to be worth it. Because that way you create flexibility. Because if you, for some reason, you have another deal that is even better, you don't want to miss out on an opportunity. Yeah. Circumstances could change, life situations. You don't want to end up being stuck with a property you didn't want to buy. So give yourself flexibility. It's about getting someone who takes, and that goes back to the question, what does a real estate lawyer do? A real estate lawyer protects your ass. That's truly what a real estate lawyer does.
But they have to know you in order to do it.
But a good real estate lawyer will try and get to know you. They will have at least a Zoom call to talk to you. Always when you're signing documents, like clerks will communicate. And like my law clerk, she's phenomenal. Like, she runs a lot of the initial part of the file. It's just a cost efficiency, and I'm on it. But ultimately, the nitty-gritty, the fundamentals, the details, you will always get to speak to the lawyer, and the lawyer will be reviewing and answering your questions. If that's not happening for you, you're not being served well, because you're paying for a lawyer's advice without receiving it.
As you're going through all of this, I am noticing that you can probably go on for hours upon hours of like all the things that we can protect ourselves from. But just for the sake of our audience being able to metabolize information and apply it to maybe their situations, I think we should go through a couple situations where people have found themselves in circumstances, and you can tell us what you think about it, how maybe they could have prevented it. Okay,
Love
does that
that.
sound good?
Yeah.
I have a situation that one of that we had a client come to us with, and he was trying to figure out a solution for it because he didn't have faith in his lawyer. And I always find it's funny when real estate investors go to other real estate investors because they're not happy with their lawyers to find out some kind of solution. But get this, he had an agreement to sell a property. And in that property, in that agreement, the buyer had an assignment clause. Coming close to the date of sale, he assigned it to somebody else, and that was fine. And the seller, my client, thought that he was just wholesaling it. No problem, didn't really care, whatever. That new buyer never closed on the property. And when that new buyer never closed on the property, he's now under the impression that he couldn't go after the original buyer because he was missing the clause in his agreement that should the assigned person fail to close, we can go after the original buyer. And usually that's in the contract.
Usually goes the other way. So what happens is, if, say, the assignor is the person assigning it. Assignee is the person receiving the assignment. Normally, without the clause is that once the assignment is complete, the assignor is released and held free and clear.
Yeah.
That's usually the way it goes. But if in the absence, the assignor is still on the hook for the agreement.
Yeah.
So probably they had a clause releasing the assignor completely off any involvement in the agreement of purchase and sale. So then you have to question, was it a bona fide assignment?
Mm-hmm.
Because what I've seen happen is sometimes people create like a dummy corp to assign it to, which has no assets. So then they're like, well, sue this corporation, it has no money. You can't come after me. Too bad, so sad.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the opportunities that you have. And then the second part is honestly, you motivate a little bit by not releasing the deposit because a assignor is still paid a deposit, right, as a purchaser. So you motivate them by saying, help us work with it. You basically try and reach out to the reasonableness and say that we can't release this deposit till we know what's going on and everything else. And honestly, at least make the allegation to try and delay the process, right? To basically, assignor will probably want his money for another deal or something like that to help get the assignee to be held accountable. And that's usually would be what I would approach and how I would handle that situation. And then ultimately, you can still sue the assignee as long as everything's been properly completed.
Mm-hmm.
You try and find recourse against an assignee. This is hard because, again, you have to negotiate deals and things in there that happen. But when I see assignments and something, especially last minute assignments, that is not to a third party, that is not like, so if it's a related entity, I'm okay with it. If it's going to a third party, I usually ask for the director of that assignee corp to be an indemnifier of that assignment. So the deal doesn't close, that corporation can't shield itself. Mm-hmm. The directors can become after directly at a personal level if they don't close.
And you can request that even if it wasn't said in the original assignment, in the original contract for purchase sale?
It's in the assignment agreement. You negotiate as part of the assignment agreement.
Okay, so you have to put it in there beforehand. So the realtors have to put that in there.
Yeah, if you're doing an assignment, it has to be something that you'd put into an assignment clause because that's somewhere you can be quite
You need
helpful.
to do a course for realtors to teach them how to do these things. Because
now, some people won't agree. They're like, oh, well, I'm not going to personal guarantee it, But ultimately, my philosophy is that if you have good faith to act on this deal, you should put it. And I goes to my clients, if they don't want to do it, that's fine. You can still go ahead. But understand that there might be a reason why. Maybe it's just that they're fearful. But generally, if you're going to close and your intention is to close on a deal and you're already at the 11th hour at this point, why would you not agree to give a personal guarantee? Because your funds should already be in place. Everything should be organized to get this deal done.
Well, I think the whole thing is that if people are refusing or reluctant, I think that's because it might be spooking them. They may have different intentions, right?
Different intention.
Having a real estate lawyer who's motivated by closing a deal versus building up their fees by delaying and stalling, and because I've seen that happen all the time where they create non-issues. Mm-hmm. And especially now when a lot of lawyers who are doing and I shouldn't say a lot, there are some out there whose volumes have fallen significantly over the last 6 months or so. What they've ended up doing is they create issues with closing just to justify extra billables. Wow. Because that's the way to compensate for the reduced volume. We do see this, so we see complete non-issues.
Creative strategy that we're going to do, and we've done that for a few times actually with our existing clients, is that we have some clients who might be in a bad situation and they're trying to offload their properties, but the sellers are never reasonable in terms of the right expectation with a listing price. So usually they try to list it a little too high, and we look at the property, we're like, okay, the condition's not there. So we create an agreement with the seller and say, hey, listen, why don't we partner up? Let us do the work, renovate your place a little bit. And then in return, we need that renovation funds or renovation capital that gets invested into the property gets paid back first with a bit of margin. And if it sells to the price that you're asking for or above, then we do 50-50 split. With that kind of creative structure, we actually call it an innovation approach in real estate investing. How would you try to protect our position in this case?
I would make sure that there's a strongly worded promissory note setting out the terms of the transaction. And I would also sign an acknowledgement and direction to that you can register the note as a mortgage if for some reason that the owner of the property does not follow through, because you'll have added value. And then the third thing is you not necessarily going through an appraisal, but at least having an assessment that the value of what labor, materials, whatever you're contributing financially into that property is accurately captured so that your LTV is never above 80%, maximum 85, like never ever above 85. Because once you go above that, then you're at the mercy if the market conditions change. If you don't know what the condition of an existing mortgage might be, you can put yourself in some tough situations where you don't get your capital back. So that's really important to make sure that no matter what, your capital that you're putting in to help them is secured.
Okay.
If you convert a promissory note to a mortgage, are you then able to attach terms to that whereby you can start adding interest and you can start adding or you can have a term associated to it?
It's an open-ended. It'll be an open-ended mortgage, so there's no term associated. It's a balance due, but essentially you will still attach and register it as a mortgage. It'll be already set out that if you default, this will be the interest rate you will start paying.
But you can say like by default, okay, if you default then and we don't follow through with the terms that we set forth, then after this date, let's say 10, 12% interest a year.
Absolutely.
These are, I feel like, some of the questions that a lot of people do have. And I feel that sometimes I don't want to go over into things that are maybe a little less common, right? Because, most people do like a lot of the basic stuff. They need to protect themselves in simple ways. Like when we're talking, even you mentioned things about terms being used. Like a lot of realtors use the words duplex, triplex, multi, whatever, right? And they mean nothing.
No, and honestly, for me, like especially if you're doing a deal over $1 million, I know what the commission is. Most people know what the commission is. Go get a freaking zoning certificate. Add that as a value add service. Or just talk to the listing agent and say, let's do it together. Let's split it 50-50. I'm coming in with a good offer. Let's just do this cost. You will have it. I will let you use it for other clients later. It's just giving your clients service. Because honestly, just think about it. Like you tell them, they'll remember. They'll be like, man, my realtor, man, he got me. There's only like, dude, that's what they remember.
Yeah.
And honestly, that matters more than like you show them 20, 30 homes. That's what, because I talk to clients. I always ask them, where did you find the value add? That's one of the questions I love asking people is, where's your value add? Where did you find you got value? And they love that little, like that soft touch that is cheaper than the hundreds and thousands of dollars you have Tesla, but like on gas and everything you put in.
No, by the way, that's actually one of my big takeaways from reading this conversation is that realtors, because they're at that forefront, they're also held to such high esteem in terms of their expertise. People think, oh yeah, if you're a realtor, that you just know stuff.
Well, but again,
90% don't.
Yeah.
90%
so
don't.
many of them do it part-time. Like there's still so many who just do it part-time. It's like it's just a side gig, right?
Yeah.
But they don't know. And also like then it goes down to the whole other side of like listing and like, what the listing price should be and how you're staging your property and all these things matters. Timing of when you list. What are you promoting about the feature sheet of your property?
Yeah. But you are really reflecting on professionals. I think one of the responsibility of professionals is that they continue to learn and grow. And think about real estate investors, especially the casual ones, like once every year or 2 or 3, they buy a property, right? Like how many transactions are they possibly going to learn to do to get that experience? However, lawyers, accountants, realtors, that is their main bread and butter. They ought to know.
Yeah, like the laws on flips change about how the taxation of it would happen. I have a client who basically still used to declare his capital gains. I don't think it's right, but he chose to do it. His realtor still trying to show him flip properties and saying, "Oh, you'll be fine." It's not going to be good. It's mandatorily. You're not going to have an election now.
Yeah.
To try and call it capital gains. It's going to be business income. So don't be stupid.
But they don't know the difference, and that's the thing is that a lot of people are getting their information off of very questionable sources because they don't want to pay for it, and you're literally getting what you pay for it. But I mean, how many realtors are getting their information off of TikTok these days?
And honestly, the other thing that you guys should promote your thing that I find is interesting is right now with the change in foreign buyers with the ban, getting foreign buyer money in and buying commercial properties. Commercial is not banned. Right now, if you have investors who've got connections in like China, India, all these places, you can bring foreign money and lock up commercial and make a killing.
Yeah. When you talk about creativity, right? Yeah. And people have this linear thinking. They're literally reading headlines, buzz lines, or whatever on some news feed, and that's all they hear. And then they don't give it any more thought. They don't think about it beyond that. So they have this linear thought process that this is now an obstacle, and they don't even think about ways around it because there's always ways around it.
100%.
Right? And you just have to figure out what it is to do.
And even like around the Greenbelt, like you already know there's a move there, right? People are still scared. They're like, how do I know it's going to happen? Well, how do I know that my property is going to happen? I'm like, you don't. But if you've got excess capital and you can buy a cheap piece of land in the Greenbelt somewhere, the people who own them now didn't buy it in the 2000s. They bought them in the 80s, the 90s, and they sat on it because they bet on the kids' future. Ultimately, do you think Canada's immigration problem is going to be solved? Like, do you think that, and I say problem, I mean, just the numbers that are coming in. We're a country of immigrants, whether you like it or not. It's not a political statement. It's just a reality. Almost all of us, except for a few First Nations, were coming as immigrants. That's not going to change. If you want to buy in land bank, it's not expensive. You don't have to do it here. You can do it in other, like around Moncton, around New Brunswick. You can do it outside there. It's not going to be a huge expense. So to say that I don't have the capital to buy property is saying I don't have the ambition or the desire to be in real estate. And that's fine. It's not for everyone. But don't say, I want to be in real estate and cost is a prohibitive factor. There's a way to get in no matter what your entry point. There is a way. It's just about being creative and working towards it.
Hard to train people to think. Anyway, listen, Jose, that was really great. It was really great having you on the show and talking about all these things. It was super insightful, and I'm sure people will have more questions for you. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you because they need a good real estate lawyer, how do you think people should get in touch with you?
Yeah, please just contact me by email and I'll respond to you within 24 to 48 hours at most.